lovelies. Here we go, my Laszlo's dudes. So, gonna try to keep these condensed to the point. All right. I'm gonna start with this. Here we go. I'm gonna show this. So these are some little video clips just to get us in the mood. Okay, hang on.
By saying this, our defense team firmly, and I mean firmly, believes in Mr. Kohberger's innocence. And right now, he's being held to have a trial in a county that believes that he is guilty. In this country, we pride ourselves on a jury system that doesn't stand for that.
So your credibility is really, really precious. I don't think that they would squander it to make a statement like that so explicitly and so directly if they did not actually mean that, if they did not actually believe, based on what we've seen in this 51 terabytes of evidence that the state has turned over, we don't think that he committed this crime.
Yet, this is what we saw.
Guilty to stabbing 4 University of Idaho students to death.
The murder of Madison Mogen, how do you plead guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
For the murder of Kaylee Gonzalez, how do you plead guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Your murder of Xana Kernodle, a human being, how do you plead guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Your murder of Ethan Chapin, a human being, how do you plead guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Bryan Kohberger appeared detached as he walked into that courtroom and seemed to show no emotion as he admitted to killing each of those 4 college students. He didn't make eye contact with his family members seated in the front row or with any of the victims' relatives, but one of those relatives was grief-stricken, wiping away tears as Kohberger entered each of those guilty pleas.
He was just really cold, and he looked very pale and just no emotion when he's admitting to 4 brutal murders, and I didn't see him look over at the victims' families either.
The judge complained about the public outcry over the plea deal, saying his hands are tied.
This court cannot require the prosecutor to seek the death penalty.
The shocking plea deal means Kohberger will be sentenced to 4 consecutive life prison terms.
Right.
Without
all right, guys.
parole.
Hey, all right. So that's where we ended up, right? So that's where we're going to begin. All right. So how did we get here? The $64 million question, right? Very dramatic difference between the beginning of the saga and to the end. You know, defense was adamant that he was innocent, and then what do we see? You know, we see the plea. So, why? Of course, why? Why? And is he guilty? Yeah, these questions, of course, the obvious ones. But where do you start, though? When you're diving into Kohberger here, where do you start? Do you start at the beginning? Do you start at the end? We're gonna start with this. What do we know about him? So look, this is not building a profile. We're not building a profile. I'm not building a profile. I'd never met him. I never talked to him. I can't build a profile on anything. But what do we know about him in terms of what other people have said? That's really the only thing we can do here, right? So what do we know about him? You know, how about this? What can we speculate to know about him? That's more accurate. Well, remember the paradox. The paradox is always running. The paradox is always running throughout this case. It is a paradox itself. So when we start by asking the question, who is this guy? Like really, to speculate, who is this? Who is he? What kind of picture, aside from certain things, we gotta remove certain things here. But who is he? Well, first of all, here's what we have to, and again, you guys know this already, but this is what we get about, this is my opinion, of course, all this is my opinion, of course, but this is what we get about Bryan. We get mixed messages about him, depending on who you're listening to. So, right? So, we can take routes here. We could take, of course he's guilty. Yes, he pled. But, so there's a couple distinctions here. He's guilty, yes, because he pled guilty. Yes, of course. Of course. Well, that's what he did. So you cannot deny that. You can't deny what he did. You cannot deny that he pled guilty. But you can also believe that he's guilty, not just because he pled, but you can firmly believe that, aside from the plea. Sure. And then if you do that, you're probably going to think of him in certain ways. Well, and this is just basic analysis, guys. You know this, I know this. But we're probably going to think of him as a psychopath. Yes, definitely. If he is guilty, beyond what we see, beyond the plea, if you say to yourself, yes, he's guilty, regardless of whether he pled or not, if this would have gone to trial anyway, I still feel he's guilty as hell. Great. So you're probably going to think of him as a psychopath. Yeah, of course. Of course. I mean, if what we were told is true happened, what happened to the victims is true, then of course you're going to think this guy is a complete, absolute psychopath. The unaliving of a person doesn't necessarily make you a psychopath, right? Right, of course. Of course. You know, it's situational. It's always, there's situations, of course, but in this situation, psychopath. Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. I mean, you're doing that to people. That's a whole other level, and that is psychopathic, of course. Psychopathic. Yeah. Which is odd. This is odd. Here again, mixed messages. You would have to think he's a psychopath to some degree, on some level. There has to be some psychopathy with him. There has to be. There has to be. In order to do what he did, there's got to be some psychopathy in there. For sure. But what's odd, though, about this psychopath, this is what's very odd, though. We don't have a past history of anything that approaches what he did. There's no past history of that. There is no history reported or that we know of that involves normal psychopathic tendencies. None of that, as far as we know, is in his history. We should see some level of antisocialness. Antisocial. Yeah, absolutely. If we're going to consider psychopathy, we don't have to, but we have to consider at least some level of antisocialness. I mean, for sure. In order to be capable of doing what he did in this scenario, you got to have some level of being antisocial here. And in disregarding human beings, just disregarding them. So we got to keep that in mind. And the question is, do we see any antisocial traits from what we were told, from interviews that we saw, from former friends, from former professors? Is there anything orally that we were told that would suggest has an antisocial personality? Again, it depends on who you want to listen to. Again, mixed messages here. Now, let's say we're listening to Ramsland. We're listening to Kathleen Ramsland. In her, let's look briefly at some of her statements regarding him. Let's do that real quick. I say we're not building a profile, and I'm really not. This is just basic. To me, this is just basic, what do we know kind of stuff. This is not me trying to build a freaking profile here. I'm not a criminal profiler by any means. I have no training in it. No, this is not trying to build a profile. These are things we have to, these are some things we probably should assume, just basic knowledge here. Okay, but let's get on to Ramsland for a second.
I've got so many questions I've wanted to ask you for so long. I want to start with, how did you first meet Bryan Kohberger? What classes of yours was he in?
Okay, I want to be just clear that I'm still within the FERPA limitations that protect students and student information, so I will talk within that. I met him in the fall of 2018 when he came to DeSales University. He had an associate's degree, and he was going to get into our 4-year program as a psychology major. He selected the forensic track, which made him an advisee for me because I managed the forensic track. And he was also in my class that semester.
And Dr. Ramsland talks about FERPA. I should have mentioned that. There's a law, it's a federal law, I believe, that she is not allowed to talk about certain aspects of a student, their grades, certain parts of their academic life. It's almost like a HIPAA. So she's going to tell us what she can, but unless Bryan Kohberger signs off, she's legally not allowed to talk about certain elements of his academic career. So just keep that in mind if there's some things that Dr. Ramsland can't answer. What was your perception of him?
Okay.
He seemed like eager to be in the classroom. He was polite. He was respectful, intense, and curious. And there was no reason for me to think that he was anything other than someone who was really interested in this potential career.
Okay. Fair enough.
Was there anything looking back now that was strange about him or that you noticed?
When I look back, there really isn't anything that stood out to me. I think when you're a teacher, your instinct is to accept students at face value. You don't, start with suspicions or, and there really weren't any red flags. He was always really quite respectful and grateful. He would thank me for things. He was attentive. He would do the work. I didn't have any concerns.
Well, okay, there you go.
I think it was 4 classes that you
4
taught
classes,
in.
correct.
What were
4
those
classes.
There were 3 undergraduate
All right.
courses.
Okay. So, 4 classes, not just one. She was his advisor for that level of study that he was at. And that's what she thought of him. That was her perception. Again, 4 separate classes that she saw him over, not just one. So I think, I could see if she only had just one class with him. Okay, you might not pick up. You might not pick up on certain things, but over 4 separate classes, I don't know. Now again, you're not necessarily, like she said, you're not necessarily looking for this stuff. However, but anyway, that's what her opinion of him was. Okay, then we move on to friends, or quote-unquote friends from the past. Again, mixed messages here. So we got a professor saying he was polite, he was kind. I didn't get any weird vibes from him. He wasn't disrespectful to me, so on and so on. Now we jump to some of the friends, though, the interviews, right? He was quiet. He was shy. We got some other people saying, well, he wasn't good with females, all that. Especially, we get more of the negative picture painting when he arrives out in Washington. That's where we get a lot of the negative picture painting from him, of him. Sorry. Sure. Yeah. So, what else do we know? I mean, we're gonna. I'm just. So he was overweight in school. We know that. We know from what we've been told, he had a substance abuse issue that he managed to get over. He lost weight. He became physically fit. We see all this. This is not speculation. We see this. We hear this. This is I would take this as fact. Okay. What we don't hear about him, though, and that's consistent, I think, throughout here, we don't hear about any consistent girlfriend. No. At least I haven't. Maybe somebody has, at least I haven't. I have not heard of any type of consistent girlfriend relationship. Maybe I again, could have totally missed it. Absolutely possible. But I don't recall hearing through any of this stuff that he had a consistent girlfriend for any significant length of time. He dated a girl for 4 years and it didn't work out and they broke up. Never heard anything like that. Oh, he dated a girl for a year and, it didn't work out. I never heard any of that story. So that's something to consider here. Now, does that make him an incel? No, it doesn't. You can't make that leap. But it's one of those things you have to think about, though, here. It truly is. Does that mean he's a psychopath? Can you say that, well, that's one of the defining characteristics of being a psychopath? No, because Ted Bundy, he had plenty of them. And he had at least one steady one that we know of for quite a long time. So no, just because he didn't have a girlfriend doesn't mean he has psychopathy going on, or that he's antisocial. Because Bundy was these things too. Even though Bundy tried to appear that he wasn't antisocial, and he did a really great job at doing that. That was one of his great strengths, right? Of course. But you cannot just say, just because we don't hear about a girlfriend, he may not have had a long-term girlfriend. He may only have had a girlfriend for a week, as far as we know, but it doesn't make him these things, though. So you got to be careful. But, however, it is something you have to keep in mind, though. As far as we know, he's a straight male. That's as far as we know, though. We could be wrong on that, too. We don't know. We don't know him for sure. We never talked to him. Nobody's ever talked to him. Nobody's ever met him in person. Nobody's ever had a conversation with him. That's, on, as far as I know, who you know what I'm saying? Well, you guys know what I mean. At least for me, of course, I've never done any of that. So we don't know. But that's one thing I have not heard in his history or whatever, people talking about him. That's one thing I have not heard. Now, I could have missed it, but whatever. So, absence of girlfriend through oral history of what we know or speculation that we've heard. All right? So that's something you got to put in the back of your mind. You got to put that in the back of your hat. That's something you got to put in your hat. You got to put it there. You do. At least I feel I have to, for sure. But, okay. Let's carry on. Mixed messages. But then we hear, okay, especially from Washington State University, from the graduate students, not necessarily undergraduates, they felt he was odd, but the real stronger messages came from the graduates, right? Yes, of course we know this. We got complaints now coming in, supposedly, from graduate students because he was argumentative with them. They tried to say, they said he was chauvinistic with them. It was, they felt all these things, they felt he mansplained a lot. All these things. They felt that he crowded their space. And, he blocked their path from leaving rooms. Now, again, is this stuff completely 100% accurate? I have no idea. I have no idea. Nobody was there unless, except the people saying it. We don't know that. We weren't there. We didn't see any of those interactions. I mean, he possibly could have been all those things. But he also, at the same time, these things could be also over dramatized as well. However, there were complaints. So you got to say, well, there has to be something there a little bit, or I don't know. But we know there's complaints. I think you could say that is true. I've never personally seen them. I don't know. I don't know if anybody has ever seen the actual complaints themselves, except for the people at the Washington State University. So, yeah. So anyway, but the whole point of this thing here is what we get about Bryan Kohberger, at least I feel, is we get a lot of mixed messages from him. We see that in the beginning from the defense counsel, where they're saying he is completely innocent, Your Honor. We believe in his innocence. We're all this stuff. They are 100% backing him, and yet at the very end we see him we see him plead. Okay. Yes. So the question is, what do you think here? What do you think he is? So if he did do this, regardless of him pleading, if you feel that he actually, yes, he is the one who committed this crime, nobody else, he's the one. Well, you gotta, again, this is what makes this so difficult with this case, the paradox with him. We have to assume some level of antisocialness, yet we don't hear about that until later, though. Until later. Until Washington State. Then maybe you could start saying, well, maybe there's a little antisocial personality shit going on here with him. But again, it doesn't come until much later, though. What age is he at? 28, right? Yee, that's odd to me. Because antisocial personality you will start seeing signs of this way earlier than 28. Way earlier than this. And that speaks to psychopathy as well here. We're going to see, there's going to, a straight line. We are going to see what we normally see with people like this. We're going to see, childhood trauma. These are the common things that we're going to see. And you guys know this. We're going to see childhood trauma. We're going to see conduct problems, conduct issues, starting at a young age. We're going to see possibly bedwetting. Okay? These things. We're going to possibly see, not in all cases, but we're going to see harming of animals. Not in all cases, but these are the common things. Harming animals. We might see fire setting, arson, antisocial traits coming out here. They're not fully formed yet. They're conduct issues. That's what they are. They're conduct issues. Not full-blown antisocial personality disorder yet. That doesn't come until a little bit later. Right? But we'd see a formation, though. A cluster. A cluster. Correct. A cluster. Here. Start forming. A constellation. Start forming. But yet, as far as we know, there's an absence of that with him. We don't hear anything about what we would hear from somebody who would do something like this. Again, mixed messages, paradox. It's very weird. This is strange. Now again, if he did this beyond the plea, and you feel that he did this regardless of the plea, regardless. That is a paradox you have to consider here. Why aren't we seeing any of these typical common symptoms, constellation, clusters of things? Why? We see somebody who's overweight in school, probably was bullied, okay? From what we were told, didn't seem like he had that many friends, okay? He wasn't an extrovert. It doesn't sound like he was extroverted, okay? It sounded he was more like an introvert. He, again, probably, and again, I'm speculating. Probably had self-esteem issues, I'm guessing, okay? He probably was, I don't know, I was not there, I'm speculating. Pure speculation here. I could reasonably assume, though, that he may have been bullied at some point in his school, maybe from late middle school into high school. I could assume maybe some bullying. I don't know for sure. We have been told, and I believe this is true, that there was some substance abuse issues that were going on. We know that he got in trouble. His father called the police on him because supposedly he stole something from his sister. I would assume that is true as well. But that's it. That's all the conduct. That one piece where he stole something from his sister, that is the only conduct issue that we hear about. We don't hear about him skinning cats, right? We don't hear about him, like, mutilating dogs or any of that wildness, right? There is nothing about that in his history that we hear of. So it's very bizarre. And as far as we know, there is no significant childhood trauma that occurred to him, as far as we know. But I think we would hear about some of this from somebody. I could be wrong. I totally could be wrong here. For sure. I mean, who knows? Maybe he did. Maybe he did skin cats. I doubt it, though. I have a strong doubt about that. I think he got tested, right? During this case, he got psychological testing. And as far as we know, the psychological testing did not include this. The psychological testing, the results as far as we were told and know, which is limited. But this does not show up. I have not heard anything about antisocial personality disorder. I have not heard anything about psychopathy. These two things go together. They absolutely go together here. You almost cannot separate the two. In fact, you can't really. Whatever, but no. Don't hear about that. Don't hear about this. I don't hear about any of the common characteristics that we'd see with somebody who has the capacity to commit this crime. Again, what are we talking about? Who is this person? It's bizarre. And it's frightening. It's very frightening because if he did this, beyond the plea, if I say I feel he did this regardless or not he pled guilty, that is scary. That is scary because he does not fit. He does not fit any what we know to be of other psychopaths. Like, think about all the classic psychopaths, right? Now, keep in mind, here's one thing, though. We got to be careful. Here's one thing we got to be careful of as well. And I'm going to end this. Look, I'm going to make these segments short. Hopefully they tie in together and they're coherent. But I have to make these short because it's going to drone on. But and again, this is not a profile of any sort. Not a profile. I'm not trying to create a profile of him. I'm just trying to do some guesswork here about what is he? What is he? Now, if somebody asked me the question, Master Nature, if you had to say if somebody said to me, what kind of psychological problems do you think Kohberger has? Or here's your choice of psychological problems. Pick one. Here's what I would pick. Here's what I would pick, and I'm going to leave it here. I can't pick antisocial because I don't hear anything about him doing any of the classic things that antisocial personality would do, right? The same with psychopaths. I don't hear any of that. However, here's what I would pick. I'm not picking autism. No. But even though he got psychological testing. No, I'm not picking autism. I'm not picking that. I'm not picking obsessive compulsive disorder. I'm not picking that either. These things don't typically lead to this, okay? This case. Here's what I would pick. Okay? This is what I would pick. Something happened here. And I'm going to leave it here, guys. And I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm playing devil's advocate. If someone, again, okay, so here's what I'm going to pick. I am going to pick this. And I'm going to give you one reason. His affect. There is a major change I feel in his affect that occurs from December of 2022, to, goddamn, sorry guys. There's a major affect change that occurs that I feel is there. From December of 2022, of what we see of his affect in court to the plea. There is a huge, to me in my opinion, there's a major affect switch here. He does not look the same at all in his affect. His affect has changed. He looks totally different to me. In some of the courtroom things leading up to trial, man, I feel he looks engaged. He looks like he's aware. He knows where he is. But man, at that plea, his affect does not look anything like what I saw before. And I wonder why that is. What happened here? What happened in this affect change here? There is something that switched dramatically here. That's one thing. But to answer the question, I would pick something more along the lines of, I'm going to use the classic phrase. It's more akin to a multiple personality disorder. That's what I would choose here. It's more like that. That's what it's like. It's more like a dissociative affect, something along that line. Multiple personality here. There's some sort of affect switch that occurs through the course of 2.5 to 3 years that we see him in court. There is a definite change here. Just go look. Look at when you first see him in court until the plea. His affect is totally different. He looks totally withdrawn. His face is different. His face looks like he lost weight in his face. His eyes are more sunken. He looks more dazed to me. There's the dazed kindness to him. He looks robotic to me. There's a robotic sense I get. There's a definite switch here. Curious. Anyway, I would pick something along the lines of there is some sort of personality switch here. There's some sort of switching here. I don't know, guys. That's not exactly it either. That doesn't nail it down 100% either here. So anyway, I'm going to leave it right there. We're going to pick it up with part 2. But the question for this one is, what is he? Like, what the hell is this guy? You know? Now, if you think he's innocent, okay, then we have to explore that side as well. However, keep in mind, though, we can't deny reality. We can't deny the fact that he pled guilty. So we got it. That is the framework, though, for this piece. Okay? He pled guilty. There's no changing that. Okay? Right now, there's no change in that. So we cannot deny that. But I think we do have to look at the other side a little bit, maybe to some degree. But yeah. Anyway, I'm leaving it right there, guys. Pick it up, part 2, a little bit later. I love you. Hope you like this. Not a profile. Okay? Bye-bye.
Shadow.